Welcome back to the PolicyViz Podcast. I'm your host, John Schwabish, for the final episode of Season 11 of the show. Whew, I am looking forward to a break. If you don't know, it's a lot of work putting a podcast together, so I'm looking forward to a couple months off. I've got one kid on her way to college. I've got another kid who, well, I don't know what he's going to be doing this summer, but we're working on that. I am very excited for this last episode of the season. I am joined by Shirly Wu, author, artist, data visualization creator, does all the things. And Shirley has, among other things, is the co-author of Data Sketches with Nadi Bremer. But she's also most recently written a few posts on the field of data visualization, where we are and where we are going as a field. In particular, she's written about innovation in the field. Has the field sort of plateaued in our innovation? And many others have written some responses and reactions to this, including, of course, myself. Ali Torben has written, has recorded a video with Will Chase and some others. Mort Steffener, who was on the show last few weeks, also wrote a reply. And so Shirley and I got to talking and decided to record a podcast episode about these issues, because I think, having these, sort of one-off blog posts really is easier, I think more interesting when we have these actual conversations. And my perspective, I think, is a little bit different than Shirley's, but I think what you'll hear in this conversation is we get to a place where we both feel, where we both sort of explain our feelings on the data visualization field, where we are and where we are going. I'm also placing this episode at the very end of this season to sort of give a nice balance to last week's episode with Edward Tufte. Sort of where we were, kind of where we started in sort of this modern era of data visualization, and thoughts on where we are going with one of the leaders in the field who has done so much to broaden how we think about visualizing data, both in the digital realm on our computers, but also in the physical realm. And as you're here, Shirley going back to school and learning about doing more art, doing more hands-on work, all rooted in data and data visualization. So I hope you've enjoyed this season of the show. Covered a lot of ground, covered a lot of different ways in which people are interacting and creating data, ways in which people are engaging others with data, and of course, our modern tool sets and where artificial intelligence is sort of poking its head into our work. If you have some time this summer, or winter, of course, if you are on the other side of the planet, I'd encourage you to check out the last 11 or so seasons of the show. A lot of great content in there, I think, to help you become a better and better and more effective data communicator. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't do the one last call out. If you could just take just a couple seconds, a couple minutes this summer while I'm off, if you could just rate or review the show on your favorite podcast provider, be it iTunes, Spotify, even on Zencastr, or if you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe to that channel. If you don't want to do any of that and you'd like to rate or review my books on Amazon or Goodreads or your favorite bookseller, I'd really appreciate that as well. So I hope you have a great few months. I look forward to bringing you more great episodes this fall. So until then, here is my conversation with Shirley Wu on the PolicyViz Podcast. Okay, now I'm starting by laughing. Hi, Shirley. How are you?
It's so great to see you.
It's great to see you. We're just gonna start by we'll just laugh the whole time. It's really good to see you. It's been far too long. I mean,
yes,
a long time since.
And it's so long that we're actually not sure if we ever talked face to face before, versus just messages and being online.
Right, and being online. Yeah. Well, that's I don't know. I think there's probably some sadness dipped in there somewhere, but we're talking now, so that's good.
Yes,
we've got a lot to talk about. You've been doing some very cool stuff over the last, just following you, watching the stuff that you've been doing, and then last few weeks, I guess, or so, you've written this series of blog posts and sort of I think sort of kicked off something that's been lacking in the field for a while, which is the community having a big discussion, which has been super fun, because I kind of missed
Yeah.
that of like everybody weighing in. So that's been fun. So we can talk about that. Um, so why don't we talk about like, I don't know where you want to pick up from, but like, yeah, like where are you? What are you up to? What have you been doing the last like couple years? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you so much for inviting me on. Thank you so much for one reading the blog post, then responding to them, and then inviting me on so that we can have a discussion.
Yeah.
Um, I guess hello, my name is Shirley. Uh, uh, I guess started out making I started out as a software engineer making data visualizations. Got really into making very big, elaborate, colorful, joyful data visualizations. I think I spent a good like 4 or 5 years of my career doing that. And then the last couple years, I guess I got really burnt out, like many people during the pandemic. Wanted
Hmm.
to do something different, and went back to grad school. So I went back to a program for an art and technology, mainly because after spending a decade making data visualizations for the web, for digital, for the screen, I
Hmm.
got really um, interested in what it would look like to take these data stories and bring them out of the screen and into the physical world. And I got really fascinated about like, what does it mean if we can kind of, you know, perceive kind of experience the data and the stories with not just our eyes and maybe our ears,
Hmm.
but what does it mean if we can also feel them or smell them? And I've never gone into the taste, but I think that
Hmm.
would, also be really
Yeah.
cool. um and so that's why I went back to grad school. And so in grad school, it was a very fun time. I learned a lot of like hardware and physical and digital fabrication. But I think what was the most interesting and fun about my time there is that it was an art school. And so it got me thinking a lot about like, what is art? What is the value of
Hmm.
art? Does it even need to have a use and a value? And then what does it mean to make art with data? And so once
Hmm.
I graduated, I wrote an article for the Nightingale on their emotions, in their like emotions volume, kind of making an argument that physical data experiences are very good for the kind of data stories that we really struggle to tell via a screen. And those might be the ones with like incomplete data or missing data or
Hmm.
imperfect, messy, or even like very emotional ones. um, and then from there I went and wrote those 3 blog posts you were talking about, and here we are.
There's like a big gap in like all the cool stuff. Like just so people know if they haven't seen. So like I would watch because when you started grad school, I don't remember I saw you sharing this stuff, but like you were doing stuff with like um, you were like coding stuff into physical things, and then like I think there was like yeah, I saw a couple of your projects, and there was like you had built, I don't know if I'd call it a robot, but it was some sort of machine that was like doing something. And I'm watching these, and I had a thought at one point.
Uh-huh.
Whether you're in school and
Uh-huh.
there are people like, that's Shirley Wu, do you guys like that Shirley over there, like, because that was after data sketches came out, and I kind of was like, I wonder if there are people who are like, whoa, there's like celebrity.
Not
Like I would have been like, yeah, that, yeah.
there was, I think, maybe a handful of people that had like worked in newsrooms or like
Yeah.
had done like, like had already done a lot of generative art things that
Hmm.
kind of knew what I had worked on.
Yeah.
But they were really nice.
I also imagine like art school being very different than like, you know, you clearly went through like business, finance, computer science, me for economics. Like I would guess that like just the atmosphere is
Oh,
very
it was so
different, and it's not
fun.
like take a test, right? Like just unleash your
Yes.
creativity every day.
Yes. So when I graduated my undergrad, I was so burnt out that like I was like, I will never go back to school ever again. I refuse to take another test. Put a
Yeah.
test in front of me and I am triggered.
Right.
And
Right.
so I should also say that the program I went to, it's called ITP, and it's at New York University. It's not, I wouldn't say it's art school. It's like a weird, like I think, okay, I don't know if everybody that went to ITP would agree with me when I say this, but to me, it feels like if a bunch of people from like hacker and maker spaces went and made art school,
Mm.
it's like got elements of art school, but like it's more also tech and design.
Yeah.
Um, but the best part, what I loved about it was that it was one no grades. And so I could go in and just learn for the pure love of
Love
learning.
learning.
And then two, no tests. It was all project based. Like
Right.
it was all final projects. And so it was very practical and hands on. And that's what I loved about it.
Yeah.
And that's the only reason why I went back because no tests and no grades.
Sounds like the dream. Just
Yeah.
learn for the sake of
Yeah.
learning, and that's amazing. Okay, so now, and I of course want to talk about the blog posts and innovation and where their field is and where it's going, and all that. But I did want to ask. So now it sounds like you're sort of combining these two skills that you have. Like
Mhm.
sometimes, or maybe both times, you're like building stuff. You're doing some exhibitions. You have a couple things coming up that we want to talk about, and then you're also doing like computer client, like sort of like data sketches, Shirley Wu like work. So is that, so have you like found the middle ground that you like, your happy space now?
Oh, completely not yet. I'm I'm like a frazzled chicken running around Tokyo right now. So what happened was the like half a year within the first half year after I graduated grad school, I had like a mini existential crisis of like what am I gonna do? Am I like an artist now? What am I? Am I doing client work again? And then kind of the balance that I figured out was like I went back to grad school because I wanted to do something different. And then because I got to have that break, I realized I kind of really missed um, data viz, our community, client work. Um,
Yeah.
and so I decided like what if I can do half and half? Like what if I can do client work and stay like a little bit like one foot in that world because I think we still have very exciting things going on.
Yeah.
Um, and then, but also, I'm so fascinated by kind of the art that I've been making and what I'm exploring with that. And
Mhm.
so then it became like, well, how do I facilitate this new art thing? And then I realized that where I'm most artistically inspired is in Japan and in East Asia. And so um, last year, I made a company here in Tokyo, and now I live half the year in Tokyo and half the year in San Francisco. And when I'm in Tokyo, I do art. When I'm in San Francisco, I do client work.
Mm.
But turns out one plus one is not two; it's like 500, and I'm still trying to figure out like how to make
Yeah.
both work at the same time
Yeah.
with me, just one person.
Yeah. I know that feeling. Yeah, like a million
Yeah,
things. Yeah. But
yeah.
that is really exciting, and I could see how they will, kind of the two sides as it were, will sort of inform each other
I
as you
hope
move on.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
day. I hope
One
so.
day.
Thank
One day.
you.
That's the dream. That's the dream.
Yes.
Okay. So let's turn to these blog posts, because that's why we sort of like started chatting. Um,
Mhm.
so, and lots of people have been talking about this now that you sort of started this, like, I would say like a bigger think series, right? So these are not sort of your like 500 word blog posts. These are like big think, with like, especially the second one, like a lot of research like went in behind that, because you talk to a lot of people. Um, and so I guess like just like the part I think just to pull out is like, and for folks who haven't read them, they obviously should. Um, Maybe read them before you listen to the rest of this podcast. I'm not
Thank you.
sure. We're gonna
Yeah,
find
we'll see. We'll
out.
see how. Yeah,
We'll
we'll see. We'll
see.
see how
We'll
the
see.
conversation goes.
We'll do this conversation, and then when I record the intro, I'll let folks know whether you should be reading them or not. Okay.
Sounds great.
So hold on. Okay. Um, so in the second post, this is the key thing I just wanted to get us started, was that you wrote, quote, the craft of telling data informed stories on the web has plateaued. And then you sort of
Mhm.
went into kind of a love-hate relationship with scrolly telling, and then sort of talk to Georgia Loopy and Moritz Stefaner and a whole bunch of other people about sort of what they see and what's going on. Um, so I don't know. There's a lot to unpack, and maybe we just start with like your main thoughts, and then you and I can fight it out for a little bit, and like
Yeah.
we'll solve all the problems. Like
We'll solve all of it.
solve all of it.
Yeah, yeah. That second one was really fun to read. A quick shout out and credit to my editor Emily Barone for even suggesting that I reach out to everybody that we'd reached out to, because I was just going to
Mhm.
write about it from my perspective, and she's like, "Well, this is a really big industry observation. Maybe you should reach out to," and she helped me make that happen.
Yeah, that's great.
Um, but this is a thought that's been brewing in my head for like 2 or 3 years now. And I think it first started happening when I was helping look through the shortlist for the 2022 Information is Beautiful Awards. And I was like, oh, these are all really beautiful and well executed, but also nothing is standing out. I think I was helping cull the shortlist down to the top three,
Hmm.
and we were like trying to rank them, and it was and I just couldn't quite. I had a little bit of a harder time that year, because everything felt they were, and the content was great. Like the
Yeah, yeah.
content and the stories were great, but from a visual perspective, they were starting to feel very templated.
Mm.
And that was when I started being like, wait, hold on, scrolly telling has been a thing for like 7 years now, or 6 years now.
Yep.
And what was, because I was so excited when scrolly telling became a thing, but then what has there been anything else since then that has been
Yeah.
as industry shifting as scrolly telling? And I just drew a blank, and so that was
Mm.
kind of the starting point of where this blog post started to take shape. And then kind of the like nail, I guess, in the coffin of like why I decided to write it was
Yeah.
when my favorite one of my favorite repeat clients, I ended up delivering just a line chart, pie chart, and bar chart for them.
Mm.
And because they had asked to scrap the only like custom designed visual, which, fully agree that without a legend, it was just so confusing, and I don't blame them for asking to cut it
Yeah.
out. Um, but just this kind of like decreased appetite I observed across like 2 or 3 years of like pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic, or at
Mm.
least like pre-grad school versus post-grad school, of like people being less adventurous with
Mm.
the chart forms that they wanted to kind of like put in front of their audiences or stakeholders. Um and then that's why I started working on the series. And then I think what then motivated the series even more was when, in the middle of working on, I will admit, is very clickbaity. The title is very cheeky. The part two, the part two where it says like what killed innovation.
Yeah.
Innovation is, I agree with you, John. Innovation is not dead. But would you have clicked on that post if I
I know.
had
I know.
written something
And
else?
I'll be honest. Like I wrote my post in response, and I was like, she's really not arguing that innovation is dead, but she used the clickbaity title. And so, what do I do? Do I just keep? I don't know. But like, no, it's true. The and you admitted that in the post itself. Like, it's
Yeah.
true. Which I think also is like, I think speaks a lot to where we are, like in the web,
Mhm.
of like how
Yeah.
do you get people to read things. Like I think that says a lot.
Yeah. That's a
Um,
meta discussion we can
yeah,
have.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It is interesting. It is a little interesting how there's like the pre-post pandemic, because there were so many graphs and data presented during the pandemic that I think a lot of people were saying, like, oh, we're increasing data or data visualization literacy, right? We saw like
Yes.
bivariate choropleth maps, and we saw histograms, we saw all these graph types. But it sounds like, would this be fair to say that, um, sort of the outcome maybe of your argument, or I'm not sure put this, but like that's not true. Like we all thought that that was happening, but then like we got on the other side of the pandemic, and like nobody wanted a bivariate choropleth map. Like it was fine to look at infections and vaccine rates, but like not when you're doing your day to day.
Yes. And actually, I think there might have been like a part of a section of the innovation article that I cut out, where it was because I think it was I think a lot of us was really quite excited is a weird word to say about the pandemic, but there was a period where we were like, yeah, like you said, we thought literacy
Yeah,
would increase and keep increasing.
right.
Um, and while I do think data literacy really increased at a massive scale, I think it only really increased for like a very certain set of charts,
Mm,
of the line charts.
mm,
And then I think people got really great at reading logarithmic scales thanks to
mm-hmm.
John
Yeah. Bern Murdoch. Yeah.
John,
John
thank you.
Bern Murdoch.
John Byrne, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and but then I don't think it ever went beyond that. And I think my hypothesis is that it's because whereas before a lot of people that were into data visualizations were we were such a niche, we were attracting people that were into like spending the time and reading
Mm-hmm.
and figuring out, like Georgia's like gorgeous designs, or like we were okay with like pouring over the keys and like spending 30 minutes on it. um but I think when it shifted from a niche interest to something that is
Mm-hmm.
like a general public, for lack of a better word, public service, um
Yeah.
it was being read by people whose that's not their interest. They just need like a quick 30-second thing that they can understand so that they can go about the rest of their day
Right.
informed on this topic that they don't necessarily want to be involved or informed on, but is a need in their day to day.
Yeah.
And so it makes a lot of sense that, like, for that purpose, the quickest, like, bar chart, line chart, something that they already know how to read, is what is the most effective and is more than enough.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a line from your blog post about like economic incentives,
Yeah.
and it makes a lot of sense. I fully agree with that. That for most use cases, the that standard set is more than good enough.
Right. Yeah. So I don't want to change the BuzzFeedy clickbaity title, but I think what I'm but I think what I'm hearing from you is not so much change in innovation, because I think the point that I was clearly making in my post is that, there's lots of ways to define innovation, and sort of I
Hmm.
focused on like the tools now are just one place. Like it's pretty amazing what you can do now with, these tools that you couldn't do 5 6 7 years ago. But what I think I'm hearing from you is that it's not so much a lack of innovation, it's sort of like almost a lack of like joy in
Ooh,
creating visuals, right? Like,
yes.
I mean, I guess because again, like everybody knows how to read a bar chart, so like we could get really like meta conceptual, right? So do I get joy from reading a chart that I just understand the point? Like there's joy
Yeah.
in that, but there is joy um in sort of trying to understand something that may be new to me. And I feel like that's what I'm hearing from you.
Yes, and I think that like I'm also not trying to argue that in every, reading of a chart, every single person, must feel joy, or that we need to design every single chart to deliver joy. Sometimes it really is just that 20-30 seconds
Yeah.
information. But I think that there was something that when I was working on the series of articles, uh, Amanda McCulloch and Elijah Meeks, they put out
Mm-hmm.
the article about the fourth wave, summarizing kind of where we are in the field right now of data communication. And to me, that article was very much an important summary of one part of our field, of
Hmm.
the part that is like public communication, about like public health communication, science communication, very important, very important things to inform and potentially influence a public. Um, but what I wanted to make sure was that that wasn't the only way. That wasn't the only summary of our field. And so one of my friends, Eric Lynn, the two of us talk a lot about our field, and I'm borrowing this analogy from him, of a film analogy. So if we kind of summarize, if we kind of um, uh, use analogy that if data viz is a field um, of like storytelling and communication, if we kind of like equate that to the film field,
Hmm.
then a lot of what the fourth wave is talking about, or like a lot of what you had mentioned, um, to me is like the public education, the documentaries, and those are very,
Hmm.
very important. But there's also like a lot of other like comedies. There are like Marvel, and there are art house. There are
Yeah.
like art house films that like make no sense to most people. But none of us are like art house should not exist, or like Marvel should not exist.
Right.
Um, we all just talk about how good or bad an particular film is. We
Mm.
don't discuss the necessity of that particular genre. And that's what I was hoping. That's kind of what I'm hoping for going forward, is like we're like, yes, public education, very good, very important. Um experimental art house, experimental like things that can push our field forward, also
Hmm.
equally important. And then within those genres, let's talk about when each individual piece is good and when it's bad.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something I wanted to get across, and maybe it didn't quite land in the series.
No, no, I think it did. I think no, I think it did land. I think there's just like we've been talking about, like kind of I might even split it up into like pre-pandemic, pandemic, and then
Yeah,
post-pandemic. Right? Like,
yeah.
um, but I guess I also wonder whether there's like you know pr- Twitter era and then like the X
Yeah,
era, and I
yeah.
do, and I haven't, I guess I haven't really thought this all the way through, but I do kind of feel like what happened in the data viz field on Twitter, which was so generally joyful
Hmm.
and fun, and had these sorts of discussions online all the time, right?
Hmm.
Um, but I do wonder whether we celebrated stuff that no one else saw or celebrated, and now because we're not all in that same room, that we're not, maybe we're just not seeing them enough, or maybe
Hmm.
or maybe creators and clients are less likely to like really push them out as like forcefully in the past. I don't know,
Yeah.
I can't. I think I would just, and you're not saying this, but I think I would disagree that like there are no art house films, right? I think it's just
Yes.
like they're harder to find.
Yes, I think they're harder to find. And also I think that while in our field we are fully accepting and celebratory of art house films, I think outside of our field most people are like, why do we need art house
Yeah,
for data viz? Like
yeah,
why someone posted my what killed innovation on a Hacker News, and not saying that Hacker News is representative of the rest of the world. It's a very specific
right,
subset of the, but
right,
most of the comments were like, this is why do we even need innovation? We just need like tufty, like minimalism, just a bar chart, just a line chart. Which then, really proves my point of
yeah,
like, I think most people outside of our field are like, we only need the public education.
yeah.
Um, and so I sorry,
Tufty
just
wrote all those posts, by the way. That was Tufty just writing all of those. He just, yeah, it's just
you're
like,
right.
yeah, it's just him.
It was
Yeah,
actually just him in all the
it's
different
just him,
accounts.
different avatars. He just made like a million accounts. Just yeah,
But I
yeah,
think you're absolutely right in that Twitter was our like we were all in the same place, and but I also I'm very sad that we don't have that anymore because the party was
Hmm.
very fun.
Yeah.
I think we had like such a beautiful niche of Twitter. Um, but also, I really enjoyed what Alberto Cairo said when I asked him about it, and he kind of I go into more detail about it in a part three, which has less of a clickbaity title, um, and I called it Beyond the Plateau. Um, and he talked about how as our field has gotten bigger, maybe it's not our one room and our one party, but maybe it's like a lot of smaller rooms
Yeah.
of parties, and then how different people have different motivations in our field. And he called himself a consolidator. I see you also as a consolidator. I see Amanda as a consolidator of like you bring the field together. You try to bring more people into the field. I think you're all trying to elevate the baseline data literacy, and that there are others. I consider myself an experimenter. I really am interested in like how do we push out those boundaries and edges.
Yeah.
Um, and that's great. And hopefully we mingle once in a while across the rooms like we are doing
Hmm.
now.
Yeah.
But it's perfectly valid that there's many forms of innovation, and for people who are consolidators, right now is a very innovative time.
Hmm. Do you have thoughts on how to? I mean, we can't bring that Twitter data viz era back because that is
Mhm.
past. But do you have thoughts on how to? I mean, maybe the right word is like increase awareness of not even the more bespoke, because I would also say like your art installations, like your art exhibits, like how do we get people more aware, and not just aware, but like you know and some of the stuff that maybe like people do, that like on the art side or on the installation side or on the physical side, like they could recreate it maybe a smaller scale. So have you thought about like how do we do that? Like is there a
Do you
way
mean
to
how
do
do
that?
we do you mean how do we like share what we're
Share
doing?
more. Yeah,
Share
share
more.
more. Do we? Yeah, I don't know, but like how do we bring sort of a some of that party, how do we bring some of that
Mhm.
party back? Because I do feel like, and yeah, I mean maybe it's not something that can be recreated anymore, and we just have to
I
celebrate the fact that there are small parties.
Yes, and I actually also think that perhaps it really is much better now with the small parties, because I do want to also acknowledge how privileged of a position that we were in to be part of that small party. I know that there's people that, we we were in a party on Twitter that was mostly like like
Yeah.
English speaking, and I also have heard a lot of times how like hard that is to enter
Yeah.
if your main first language isn't English, or or even just the I one of the things I loved about the parties was how I got to meet people in person at conferences, that like I had known from Twitter, but that's also inherently very
Yeah.
exclusive. So I actually think that these like smaller parties are really
Hmm.
great because I think it does end up being much more inclusive, hopefully more
Hmm.
inclusive. And hopefully there's just still that we don't all become siloed in
Yeah.
each of these, that there's still some amount of like cross pollination, cross
Yeah.
conversation across
Yeah.
these parties. That's the first part of what I think. And the second part is also that I don't know if it's a post pandemic thing, but I think less online these days and more
Hmm.
just local. I've been thinking a lot. I really enjoyed your conversation with Yanni about like
Hmm.
local data and going out and talking to the community. I think much more about like um how do I engage and meet people locally, and then kind of like um and then especially because you know, um, art shows are inherently geographically exclusive.
Yeah.
The physical installations are
Right.
inherently exclusive.
Right.
But how do we consider that as a feature and not a bug? And maybe it's very much about engaging with the local community, inviting them in, a lot of whom are not online,
Mm-hmm.
and then having conversations with them, and hoping that they will see my work and engage with it. And then that's my first step, my first priority. And then it's about how do I document it, for the more people online to see.
Yeah. Well, and yes, I think that's great, and I think they're sort of like can and this is how I've sort of thought of like the physical data viz stuff, right? Is like Sam Huron and Wes Willett have this book. What is it called? Making with
Yes.
Data, right? Which I
Yeah.
love this book, but like 90% of the projects in that book are things that I could never like bending copper tubes into like this hanging thing. Like I couldn't do that, but I could do that with straws or I could
Hmm.
do it with like cardboard, right? So like are there ways to bring people into the physical space with data and then empower them to do a sort of like I don't know, smaller, even more local version on
Ooh.
their own, right?
Yeah, what a fascinating idea. I have not been thinking about that as much. I like to describe where I am currently with, I have so much pent up feels to make my own shows with for now that
Yeah, yeah,
I don't quite yet have the capacity to think about like workshops that involve others. Hopefully
yeah,
I'll get there in a few years
yeah,
after
yeah.
I get out all my feels.
Right.
But what I've been really loving, I talked to Paying as part of the article, Paying from Continentalist, and I
Mm-hmm.
loved how she described how they no longer really call themselves, like, I think, a data visualization studio, but rather like in human experiences. I love that.
Mm.
And she was telling me about a workshop where um nothing was like, one to one data mapped, but instead they invited people from the community in, and asked them to make, like, bouquets from I think paper flowers, and they got to choose like different colors of paper flowers based on their answer of, I think it was, how does this, or um, I think it was like, what is ancestry to you, or like what is a which
Mm.
flower best represents ancestry for you. And then
Mm-hmm.
they kind of like made that bouquet together and they talked about it. And I love that. I feel like it's um, very similar in what you described about, like, yeah, I can't bend copper either.
Well,
But
either
is
of us, you would be better able to do it than I would. So, you know.
no. But assembling a bouquet, that's something that everybody can do.
Yeah.
And I love these, and this ties into a, I think, still a half-formed thought that I've been having about perhaps what we're going to see in the future is less about, someone that makes data visualizations or data stories or data dashboards or data art, but rather
Mm-hmm.
like designers that um, have to be fluent in communicating with data, or like artists that use data as part of their medium, and
Mm-hmm.
that data will become so ubiquitous that we don't really, like we don't really make as much of a big deal about it. And I think that that is how, I think that's how, like, I feel like we're like consolidators, and me, like, I feel like we're working towards the same thing but from like opposite ends of, like,
Yeah.
I think that for me, I'm moving, especially in my art, I'm moving further and further away from one to one, like visual channel mapping, um, but
Yeah.
rather use data in my art, in a way that doesn't look like a chart, or that doesn't look like there's data, but it's backed by data, and that's the conversation starter. And I
Yeah.
feel like the fact that it does not look like a chart, is what makes it less intimidating for non data people to come in and talk about a topic.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's the data, right? That I think. So here's the example. I think at least this is how I think about it. Uh, if I showed any old person a box and whisker plot, right? It's just a rectangle with some lines off the end, not a
Yeah.
complicated form. But if I say this is a 75th percentile and this is a 25th percentile, and this, like most people, those concepts, not that they can't learn them, but they're, they just don't know those concepts. But if I showed you the same plot type, and instead of the 25th and 75th, I said this is the high temperature of the day and this is the low temperature of
Hmm.
the day, everybody would understand that. So it's like,
Hmm.
it's framing, it's not the viz necessarily, it's the data that
Hmm.
we need to sort of figure out how to get that clearer. I don't know. I mean, a lot of these are challenges that we've been wrestling with for a long time.
Yes,
And it's
definitely.
just now sort of like, I don't know, maybe we have sort of like the field sort of bifurcated out and now we're just kind of like bringing it back together in different ways. And like, I don't know.
I think we are working towards the same thing, but just
Yeah.
like from different approaches. And
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right in that. Um, I think at the end of the day, we're trying to make um, reading and understanding data more accessible, especially, we can't deny that it's everywhere in our lives now. So how do we make
Yeah.
it more accessible for people that don't want to read data, the people that
Yeah.
like are like, oh, numbers, um I don't want a number.
Right.
So then how do we make that easier to digest?
Yeah.
And I think that's very exciting. I think that's the innovation part that I'm excited about going forward.
Yeah. I like that note to almost end on. We could talk about this forever, I think, and we might have to have another conversation. But so before I let you go, um, what's next? I know you have at least one show coming up, if not two.
Yes.
And then where can folks like get in touch with you so that you can come and do the show at their place or do the digital thing
Oh, I
with
would
them?
love that.
Yeah.
I would love that. Yeah, so I have two shows coming up this fall in Tokyo. The first is a solo show in the end of September. I am now going to start calling it my feels. The shows, my solo shows are the feels ones. And this one is about immigration and the immigrant experience and the search for home and belonging. And
Mm,
so it it has data in the
mhm,
sense that I'm going to interview about 8 or 9 people that have this very unique experience uh, of having immigrated somewhere as a child and then immigrated back to that area as an adult. um, I'm going
mm.
to visualize their experiences, um, and then actually, I'm not going to get into too much detail, but I will send you the link of
Okay, great.
um
I will share it. I will share it
uh
out.
yes,
That's the first show, and that's in
that's the first
Tokyo in
one.
September. Okay,
Yes,
and
and
then
then the second one is also in Tokyo in October, is a collaboration with my dear friend Amy Wibowo, and a little bit more fun. We are doing data-driven ceramics,
oh,
and the
fun.
ceramics are the data is the flowering dates of cherry blossoms and the leaf colored when ginkgo trees turn from green to yellow in the fall,
Hmm. Yeah,
over the last 80 years. And it's very fun, but also you're gonna see that the cherry blossoms are getting earlier and earlier, and the ginkgo
yeah,
trees are getting later and later because climate
yeah,
change.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I have the I have the cherry blossom Lego up there, which is not the same, but I've got that.
Oh,
Those are
cool.
both super exciting. So okay, so for us U.S. folks, we have to go to Tokyo. We have to go to Japan to see
Yes.
you see yourself in
Yeah.
person.
Please.
Okay, okay. So how can people get in touch with you? So they want to learn more. They want to work with you. They want you to do a show.
Yeah. Yeah. My email is hi at shirleywu.studio. Any work inquiries, any shows, I would love to hear from you. But if you just want to know any updates on the shows, I'm going to start posting kind of like behind the scenes work
Oh,
in
cool.
progress kind of
Yeah.
posts. And so my newsletter is at shirleywu.studio/notebook. Um, And yeah,
Awesome.
I occasionally post on LinkedIn and Instagram, but
Or write long
unreliable.
3-part blog posts that take a while to write and research, but
Oh my God.
occasionally.
Yeah. My after those, I was like, Emily, can we do like 500 word? Like, can we do fluff?
Yeah, right. Let's do
My
something
brain
short.
cannot.
Yeah. Well, they're great, and I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but what I also loved about them is they spurred a discussion, both like this, but also publicly on various channels, and people sort of debating about whether good, bad, yes, no, what direction we're going. So I think spurring that conversation is a as I would say, a mitzvah in its own to like get people to have these good conversations.
Thank you so
Um,
much.
so Shirley, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's really good to see you. Congrats on everything. I'm very excited to see at least the behind the scenes, because I don't think I'll be getting to Tokyo in the fall, but I do appreciate it. So
No, why not?
well, I've got a lot of travel. Don't tell anybody. I might go to Viz, so that's
Ooh.
in Europe. So that's good. But yes, maybe one day I'll get back over there. So, but thank
Yes,
you. This
please.
was a lot of fun. Thanks
Thank
so
you
much.
so much. Thank you for having me, John.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that show. I hope you enjoyed this season, and I hope you take some time to go back and check out some of the previous episodes. And if you wouldn't mind, rate or review the show wherever you get your podcasts. So until next time, which will be fall of 2025, thank you so much for listening. This has been the PolicyViz Podcast with John Schwabish.